Pride and Prejudice, the Bennets. It is of course generally accepted that a wealthy single man must be in search of a wife. As soon as such a man moves into a neighborhood, each of the families that live there will, without any inquiry as to his own feelings on the subject, immediately consider him the rightful property of one of their daughters. "My dear Mr. Bennet," said Mrs. Bennet to her husband one day, "have you heard that Netherfield Park has been rented at last?" Mr. Bennet replied that he had not. "But it has," she repeated. "Mrs. Long has just been here and she told me all about it." Mr. Bennet made no answer. "Do you not want to know who has taken it?" cried his wife impatiently. "You want to tell me, and I have no objections to hearing it." This was quite enough encouragement. "Well, my dear, Mrs. Long says that Netherfield has been taken by a rich young man from the north of England, that he came down on Monday to see the place and was so pleased with it that he agreed to take possession immediately, and that some of his servants are to be in the house by the end of the week." "What is his name?" "Bingley." "Is he married or single?" "Oh, single, my dear, an unmarried man of a large fortune, 4,000 or 5,000 pounds a year. What a fine thing for our girls!" "And why is that? What difference does it make to them?" "My dear Mr. Bennet," replied his wife, "how can you be so annoying? You must know that I'm thinking of his marrying one of them." "Is that his intention in settling here?" "Intention? Nonsense! How can you talk like that? But it is likely that he may fall in love with one of them, and therefore you must visit him as soon as he comes." "I see no reason for that. You and the girls may go, or even better, you may send them by themselves, because as you are as good looking as any of them, Mr. Bingley might like you the best of the party." "My dear, you praise me too highly. I certainly have had my share of beauty, but when a woman has 5 grown-up daughters, she ought to give up thinking of her own appearance. But you must go and see Mr. Bingley when he comes." "I cannot promise to do so." "But consider your daughters. You must go, because it will be impossible for us to visit him if you do not." "You are too anxious to do what is proper, surely. I dare say Mr. Bingley will be very glad to see you, and I will send him a few words by you to inform him of my complete agreement to his marrying whichever of the girls he chooses. Though I must throw in a few good words for my little Lizzie." "I hope you will do no such thing. Lizzie is not a bit better than the others, but you are always showing a preference to her." "They have none of them much about them to admire," he replied. "They are all silly and empty-headed like other girls, but Lizzie is a little more intelligent than her sisters." "Mr. Bennet, how can you speak of your own daughters in such a way? You take pleasure in annoying me. You have no pity on my poor nerves." "You are mistaken, my dear. I have a high respect for your nerves. They are my old friends. I have been listening to news of them for the last 20 years. "Oh, you do not know how I suffer." Mr. Bennet was such a strange mixture of cleverness, sharp humour, silence, and unexpected changes of mind, that the experience of 23 years has not been long enough to make his wife understand his character. Her mind was less difficult to understand. She was a foolish woman. When she was anxious, she imagined herself to be ill. The business of her life was to get her daughters married. Its pleasure was visiting and news. Mr. Bennet was among the first of those who visited Mr. Bingley. He had always intended to do so, though he continued to let his wife believe that he would not go. He finally made his intentions known in the following way. Watching his second daughter occupied in sewing a coloured band around a hat, he suddenly addressed her with, "I hope Mr. Bingley will like it, Lizzie." "We are not in a position to know what Mr. Bingley will like," said her mother bitterly, "if we are not to visit him." "But you forget, mother," said Elizabeth. "We shall meet him at the public balls, and Mrs. Long has promised to introduce him." "I do not believe Mrs. Long will do any such thing. She has 2 nieces of her own. She is a selfish, insincere woman, and I have no opinion of her." "Neither have I," said Mr. Bennet, "and I am glad to find that you do not depend on her serving you." Mrs. Bennet would not make any reply, but, unable to control her annoyance, began complaining to one of her daughters. "Don't keep coughing so, Kitty. Have you little pity on my poor nerves?" "Kitty lacks judgment on her coughs," said her father. "She chooses the wrong moment." "I do not cough for my own amusement," replied Kitty. "When is your next ball to be, Lizzie?" "In 2 weeks from tomorrow." "So it is," cried her mother, "and Mrs. Long does not come back until the day before, so it will be impossible for her to introduce him, because she will not know him herself." "Then, my dear, you may have the advantage of your friend and introduce Mr. Bingley to her." "Impossible, Mr. Bennet, impossible when I'm not acquainted with him myself. How can you be so annoying?" "Well, if you will not perform this duty, I will do it myself." The girls looked at their father. Mrs. Bennet said, "Nonsense, nonsense, I'm sick of Mr. Bingley." "I am sorry to hear that, but why did you not tell me so before? If I had known it this morning, I certainly would not have gone to see him. It is very unlucky, but as I have actually paid the visit, we cannot escape the acquaintance now." The astonishment of the ladies was just what he wished, that of Mrs. Bennet being perhaps beyond the rest, though when the first excitement was over, she began to say that it was what she expected all the time. "How good it was of you! I was sure you loved your girls too well to neglect such an acquaintance. Well, how pleased I am, and it is such a good joke that you went this morning and never said a word about it until now." "Now, Kitty, you may cough as much as you can," said Mr. Bennet as he left the room, having had enough of his wife's talk. "What an excellent father you have, girls," she said, when the doors were shut. "I do not know how you will ever repay him for his kindness. At our time of life it is not so pleasant, I can tell you, to be making new acquaintances every day. But for our dear daughters we will do anything. Lydia, my love, though you are the youngest, I dare say Mr. Bingley will dance with you at the next ball." "Oh," said Lydia confidently, "I am not afraid. Though I am the youngest, I am the tallest." The rest of the evening was spent discussing how soon Mr. Bingley would return Mr. Bennet's visit, and deciding when they should ask him to dinner.